It all started at a neighborhood barbecue on a hot Saturday afternoon. You know, the kind of gathering where everyone acts a little too friendly, drinks flow a little too easily, and gossip moves like wildfire. My wife, Sarah, was there, mingling in her effortless way, laughing a little too brightly at jokes that weren't funny. But I didn't think much of it. She was just being herself, the social butterfly she always had been. That was, until I overheard something that made my skin crawl. I was by the grill with a couple of guys, talking about weekend plans, when I heard Mike's voice drift over. Mike, a good friend of ours, always the jokester and definitely the life of the party. He was in the middle of telling the group some story, something about the thrill of sneaking around with someone who was, and I quote, just a little too off limits. Let's just say, it's got that rush, you know. There's nothing like it. The secrecy, the close calls, keeps things exciting. He laughed, then took a long swig of his beer. Especially when her husband doesn't have a clue. The laughter around him was easy, a little too comfortable. But I couldn't laugh. I felt my stomach twist into knots. It wasn't a new thing to hear Mike brag about his adventures, but this time, it was different. Something about his tone, the confidence. It was like he was talking directly to me, daring me to look for something I'd missed. Man, that's low, I muttered, half hoping he'd hear me. But Mike just shrugged with a smug grin, brushing it off. It was later that evening when I finally caught Sarah's eye. She had that glow about her, flushed from a little too much sun and just the right amount of wine, mingling with our friends and neighbors as if she didn't have a care in the world. She waved at me, then turned back to her conversation, the smile lingering a little too long. And there was something about the way she looked, or maybe the way she looked at me, that left me with a cold feeling in the pit of my stomach. I tried to brush it off, chalking it up to Mike's stupid comments. But when we got home that night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was reading too much into it. But there were little things I kept noticing. Sarah's phone, always buzzing with notifications, her late nights with work friends, and those quick glances at her screen that she tried to hide. It was subtle, but once I started seeing it, I couldn't unsee it. It was like a puzzle with a piece that didn't fit, and the more I stared at it, the more my mind raced. One night, when she thought I was asleep, she slipped out of bed and tiptoed to the living room. I waited a few minutes before quietly following, curious about what she was up to. I found her on the couch, phone in hand, face lit by the glow of her screen, smiling at something I couldn't see. She was typing away with quick, quiet fingers, barely glancing up when I approached. "Hey, what are you doing up?" I asked, doing my best to sound casual. She jumped, almost dropping her phone, then laughed awkwardly. "Oh, you scared me. Just couldn't sleep. Figured I'd check my messages." That uneasiness crept back in, filling the air between us with a heaviness I couldn't shake. Her eyes darted to her phone before quickly locking it, flashing me a smile that looked forced. "Everything okay?" she asked, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. But I could tell her heart wasn't in it. She was waiting for me to go back to bed so she could get back to her conversation. "Yeah, just didn't expect to see you up, that's all," I muttered, heading back to the bedroom with a sense of dread coiling tight in my chest. I lay there in bed, wide awake, with the thought gnawing at me, could it be true? Could Sarah be hiding something? My mind wouldn't let it go. Days went by, and the tension between us grew thicker. She became guarded, laughing off any attempt I made to dig deeper. But one night, after she went to bed, her phone was left on the kitchen counter, screen face down. It was just sitting there, a foot away from me, practically daring me to pick it up. I wasn't the type to snoop, but something about Mike's words, Sarah's late nights, her guarded glances, they all kept stacking up in my mind, pushing me to look. Just this once, I told myself. Just to put my mind at ease. With trembling hands, I unlocked her phone. The passcode was the same one she always used, her birthday, and the screen lit up in my hand, revealing a long list of messages. At first, it looked harmless, messages from friends, family, her coworkers. But then I saw it, a contact saved as Justin. Nothing more. No photo, no last name. My heart pounded as I opened the message thread. The texts were casual, but with a familiarity that didn't sit right. They joked about inside things I didn't understand, talked about meeting up soon, about how they missed each other. And then I saw it, a single line that shattered any doubt. I can't wait to see you Friday. Miss you like crazy. The room spun as I stared at the message, feeling my whole world tilt on its axis. Friday, she had told me she was going to be out late at a work dinner. My blood ran cold. The truth was sitting right in front of me, undeniable and raw. Sarah was seeing someone else. I put the phone down slowly, my mind a blur of disbelief and anger. I didn't know what to think, let alone what to do next. Part of me wanted to storm into the bedroom, confront her then and there. But another part of me, the part that was still in shock, told me to wait. To think it through. So I sat in the dark, the realization settling over me like a suffocating weight. I was a wreck the next morning. I barely slept, kept awake by thoughts spiraling in every direction. Sarah got up before me, slipping out of bed quietly, probably thinking I was still asleep. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, every detail of last night's discovery replaying in my mind. I wanted to storm out of bed to confront her, but a strange paralysis kept me still. I wasn't ready yet. I needed answers before I'd act. As I dragged myself into the kitchen, she was already there, sipping coffee and scrolling through her phone, the same way she did every morning. But today, her casual attitude, her easy smile, it all felt like a slap in the face. How could she act so normal, so happy? I watched her, wondering if this was all just a game to her. Did she enjoy sneaking around? The thrill of fooling me? Good morning, she said brightly, looking up and flashing a smile, the kind that used to make my day. Now it only made my stomach turn. You sleep okay? I forced a smile and grunted a response, trying to hide the fury boiling beneath the surface. My heart hammered in my chest as she took another sip, glancing back down at her phone, completely unaware of the silent storm building inside me. I couldn't take it. I needed air, needed space. Without another word, I grabbed my keys and left, heading to the park near our house. I sat on a bench, staring out at nothing in particular, trying to gather my thoughts. It felt surreal, like I'd fallen into a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I had trusted Sarah with everything, never doubted her once. And now? I didn't even know who she was anymore. Every moment with her felt like a lie, every touch a betrayal. But as I sat there, the anger started shifting to something else, a need to know the truth. I needed to find out exactly how deep this went. That afternoon, I reached out to my brother, Luke. Luke was the rational one, the guy who always knew what to do in a crisis. I called him up, hoping he'd have some kind of advice. Hey, what's up? He asked when he picked up, his voice casual. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. Luke, I think Sarah's cheating on me. There was a pause, long enough for me to hear my own heart pounding. Tom, are you serious? He finally said, his voice low, shocked. Yeah, I muttered, telling him about the messages, about everything I'd seen last night. Saying it out loud felt like ripping off a bandage, exposing the raw, ugly truth. Man, I don't know what to say, Luke replied, his voice heavy. Are you sure? I mean, have you talked to her? No, I admitted. Not yet. I don't even know if I can. I feel like if I confront her without knowing the whole story, I don't know. I need proof. All right, he said, sighing. I don't know, Tom. Maybe you should be careful, just in case. I mean, I know you want the truth, but this kind of thing can really mess with your head. You don't want to act on impulse. I agreed, even though every fiber of my being wanted to charge in, to demand answers. But Luke was right. I needed to stay calm, to gather whatever information I could before doing anything drastic. We ended the call, and I felt a bit steadier, but only just. Over the next few days, I fell into a rhythm of quiet surveillance. Sarah would come home, kiss me on the cheek, ask about my day as if nothing was wrong. But her casual demeanor only fueled my suspicions, each interaction feeling like another piece of a puzzle I didn't want to finish. I started tracking her location through her phone, trying to figure out where she was going during those late nights, looking for patterns. One evening, as she was getting ready to go out for what she called a business dinner, I found myself watching her from the doorway, my fists clenched. She looked beautiful, wearing a dark dress she'd recently bought, her hair swept up in that elegant way she always wore for special occasions. I couldn't believe I was jealous of some faceless name in her phone, but I was. I resented him in a way I didn't know was possible. She caught me staring, and a flicker of discomfort passed over her face. "You okay?" she asked, forcing a smile. "You seem off lately." "Just tired," I muttered, looking away before she could see the doubt in my eyes. "You know, work stuff." She nodded, slipping on her heels. "Well, don't wait up. It might be a late night." As she left, a wave of anger washed over me. Late night, right? I knew exactly what that meant. She didn't even bother hiding it anymore. But I needed more than just my own assumptions. I needed something concrete. After she left, I followed her. I know, it sounds ridiculous, almost juvenile. But as I drove a few blocks behind her car, watching her tail lights in the dark, I felt like a detective unraveling a twisted mystery. She didn't go to a restaurant. She didn't go to her office. Instead, she pulled up to a small coffee shop tucked away in a quiet part of town, a spot we'd been to only a handful of times together. A few moments later, a man got out of a black sedan and joined her inside. My pulse quickened. I parked a distance away, watching from the shadows as they sat by the window, talking in low tones, their faces close, too close. From where I sat, I couldn't make out his features, but I saw the way he looked at her. It was a look I used to know, one I used to give her. I couldn't stay there. The longer I watched, the more nauseated I felt. I started the car, heading back home, my mind spinning. Everything was becoming real. She was meeting him, lying to my face, betraying me right in front of my eyes. When I got home, I collapsed onto the couch, my mind a tangled mess of disbelief, anger, and hurt. I thought I'd feel better with the confirmation, but instead, the betrayal cut deeper. I needed more than just a glimpse through a window. I needed undeniable proof. 2 nights later, I installed a small camera in the living room, hidden behind a stack of books on a shelf. It was a desperate move, something I never thought I'd do, but I didn't care anymore. I needed to know the truth. I needed to see everything for myself. The next day, I went through her phone records, combing through text logs and call history. Was in there constantly. Dozens of texts, many late at night, calls that lasted hours. My blood boiled as I realized how deep it went. I could picture her lying in our bed, messaging him while I slept beside her, sharing secrets, laughs, maybe more. Each piece of information I found only fueled my anger, filling me with a desperate need for answers. Then, one evening, I caught a break. She had left her phone unlocked in the kitchen again, and this time, I went deeper. I opened her photo gallery, scrolling past pictures of of our friends, until I found a set of images that made my heart stop. There were selfies of her, taken in the bathroom mirror, dressed in outfits I'd never seen. Pictures of her smiling, pouting, posing in ways I hadn't seen in years. I scrolled further, until I found one of her and a man. His arm was around her shoulders, their faces close, both grinning as if they had a secret. My stomach twisted as I realized I recognized him. Mark, the guy from the coffee shop. A regular at her gym. A friend, or so I'd thought. I closed the photos, feeling like I was going to be sick. There it was, staring back at me, the confirmation of everything I had feared. Sarah was lying to me, sneaking around, building something with someone else, right in front of my eyes. And now, it was all out in the open. The next morning, she kissed me goodbye on her way to work, completely oblivious to the fact that I knew everything. The next few days were a blur. I'd thought finding the truth would bring some kind of relief, maybe even closure, but it didn't. Instead, it only added fuel to the fire that was consuming me from the inside out. I couldn't sleep, couldn't think straight. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them, Sarah and Mark, laughing, sharing moments I used to think were ours alone. It felt like my world had shifted, and nothing was as it seemed anymore. On the outside, though, I played my part. I kept up the act, just like Sarah had been doing with me for who knows how long. I smiled, made small talk, and went through the motions of my daily life. But inside, I was unraveling. Every time I looked at her, I felt like I was staring at a stranger. She had lied to me, betrayed me, turned our marriage into a facade, and I was just supposed to accept that. No. Not a chance. I needed answers. Real answers. Not just what I could infer from stolen glances and vague messages. I wanted to know exactly how long this had been going on, what she saw in him, and maybe worst of all, how little she thought of me to go through with this in the first place. The resentment was eating me alive, and I needed to know everything. I needed control back in my life, even if it was by whatever desperate means I could manage. So I dug deeper. I reached out to an old friend, Adam, a guy who'd helped me with tech setups in the past. Adam wasn't someone I would normally go to with this kind of thing, but at that point, I didn't care about pride or appearances. I just wanted the truth, even if it meant crossing lines I'd never considered before. "Hey, Tom," he greeted, sounding surprised when I called him up one night. "Been a while. What's up?" I hesitated, feeling the weight of what I was about to ask. But there was no turning back. "Adam, I need a favor. Something kind of out there." I quickly filled him in, sparing most of the details. All he needed to know was that I wanted to keep an eye on Sarah's activity without her knowing. There was a long silence on the line. "Tom, are you sure? This isn't like you." "I know," I replied, my voice tight. "But I need this, Adam. I need to know what's really going on." Another pause, then a resigned sigh. "All right. I'll help you out. Just be careful, okay?" With Adam's guidance, I installed a tracking app on Sarah's phone. The setup was simple, undetectable, and gave me access to her messages, call logs, and even her location in real time. It was unsettling, doing something so invasive, but I told myself it was justified. She had crossed the line first, and this was the only way I could get to the bottom of things. The next day, I started seeing the notifications. Messages between her and Mark. I didn't have the stomach to read through every exchange, but I skimmed enough to know they weren't talking about fitness tips or diet plans. They shared inside jokes, discussed plans to meet up, and dropped hints that made my blood run cold. This was more than a fling. This was a relationship. They had built something while I'd been left in the dark. One message in particular caught my eye. It was from Sarah, sent just the night before. "Last night was amazing. I feel like a teenager again. Same place next week?" I clenched my phone so hard I thought it might break. Amazing. Like a teenager again. The words echoed in my head, making my stomach twist with a mix of anger and nausea. I couldn't believe it. The life we'd built together, the history we shared, it all meant nothing to her. She was throwing it all away for this cheap thrill, this secret double life she'd been leading right under my nose. That night, I waited for her to fall asleep before slipping out of bed and checking her phone again. I needed to see if there were any photos, any messages she hadn't erased. As I scrolled, I found a new thread, an email exchange between her and Mark, labeled as work-related. They were careful with the wording, but it was all there, hidden between the lines. They talked about how much they looked forward to upcoming meetings, about how collaborating with each other was the highlight of their week. They weren't clever enough to fool me, though. I could read between the lines, could see the flirtation disguised as business language. My chest tightened as I read one email from Sarah, her tone almost playful. "Maybe we should move our meeting place. I think Tom's starting to suspect something." My jaw clenched. She knew. She knew I was catching on, And yet she was brazen enough to keep going, to make plans with him right under my nose. I shut her phone and left the room, sitting in the living room in the dark, running through my options. Confronting her would be easy, but would it be satisfying? Would it be enough to ease the ache, the anger? No. I wanted more. I wanted her to understand exactly what she'd done to me, to our life together. I needed a plan, something that would make her feel the betrayal, the broken trust. I wanted to make her see what she'd destroyed. The next day, I took things a step further. If Sarah wanted secrecy, I'd show her just how exposed she was. I installed a small camera in the garage, right above where she parked her car. It was hidden, nestled behind a shelf of old tools, invisible unless you knew it was there. I wanted to know exactly where she went, who she met and when. She thought she could keep this hidden, but I was about to show her that I was one step ahead. It didn't take long. That evening, I got my first notification. Her car had pulled into a nearby park, one of those quiet, secluded places no one ever thought to look. The camera footage synced to my phone, giving me a clear view as she got out of the car and waited by a bench. Within minutes, Mark arrived. He greeted her with a smile, one that was too familiar, too comfortable, as if they'd been doing this for years. They sat on the bench, close but not touching, talking and laughing like they had all the time in the world. I watched, feeling my heart sink as I took in every detail. There was no guilt, no hesitation, just a natural ease between them, a bond that once belonged to us but had now been stolen by this stranger. I felt like I was suffocating, trapped in my own skin, watching them play out their betrayal in real time. But I didn't look away. I needed this proof, needed to feel every painful second to remind myself why I couldn't just forgive her and move on. She had destroyed us, shattered the trust that had once held us together, and there was no going back. The days blurred together after that, each one marked by a fresh betrayal. I kept watching, kept gathering evidence, every new message and photo only confirming what I already knew. She was gone. The woman I thought I loved, the life we built together, it was all an illusion. She had left it behind for this stranger, this fantasy life she'd created with Mark. And I was left to pick up the pieces, to find a way forward in the ruins she'd left behind. Finally, the decision became clear. If Sarah thought she could keep living this double life, I was about to show her just how wrong she was. I didn't want revenge, not exactly. I wanted her to understand, to see what she'd done to us. I wanted her to feel the weight of her betrayal, to know exactly how it felt to be left behind. And so, I began to plan my next move, knowing that when the time came, she'd have nowhere to hide. The silence in our house was suffocating. Every night Sarah would come home, kiss me on the cheek like she always did, and go about her business. And every night I'd sit on the couch, pretending to watch TV, while the weight of what I knew hung heavy between us, unspoken but undeniable. I was waiting for the right moment, waiting until I had everything I needed before confronting her. But I didn't know how much longer I could hold out. It was a few nights later when I met up with Mike. He'd been calling, pestering me to go out for drinks, and honestly, I needed the distraction. I was reaching a breaking point, and the last thing I wanted was for Sarah to catch on to the storm raging inside me. I figured a night out with friends might help me clear my head, or at least keep me from snapping under the pressure. The bar was crowded, loud, and full of people trying to drown their own problems in music and cheap beer. Mike was already there, waving at me from a table in the back, a beer in hand and that same cocky grin on his face. "Tom! Finally, man," he greeted, clapping me on the back as I sat down. "Been too long since you've joined the party." "Yeah, just busy," I muttered, trying to keep my voice steady. I wasn't in the mood for his jokes or his wild stories tonight, but I forced myself to act normal. Mike started talking, jumping from one story to another, hardly noticing my half-hearted responses. But then, out of nowhere, he leaned in, lowering his voice. "Hey man, I gotta tell you, I know something's been up with Sarah." I froze, my heart pounding as his words registered. I hadn't told him anything about what was going on, hadn't shared a single detail. But somehow he knew. What are you talking about? I asked, keeping my tone casual even though every nerve in my body was on high alert. Mike raised an eyebrow, giving me a knowing look. Oh, come on, Tom. You're not that clueless. She's been, let's just say, different lately, hasn't she? He paused, taking a long sip of his beer. I mean, between you and me, I'd be a little suspicious if I were in your shoes. I clenched my fists under the table, trying to keep my anger in check. What are you trying to say, Mike? He shrugged, leaning back in his chair. Look, man, I've seen this kind of thing before. People change, get bored, start looking for something new. Happens to the best of us, right? I'm just saying, maybe you should keep an eye out. Just in case. The words hung in the air between us, each one stinging like a slap to the face. Part of me wanted to lash out, to confront him, but another part, the part that had been quietly gathering evidence, playing the long game, held me back. If Mike knew something, if he had even the smallest piece of information that could confirm what I already suspected, I needed it. I needed him to talk. All right, Mike, I said, forcing myself to keep my voice calm. You seem to know a lot about what's going on. Care to elaborate? He gave me a sly grin, leaning in closer. Look, Tom, I don't have the full picture, all right? But I've seen Sarah around, more than once, with that trainer of hers. Mark, right? My stomach turned at the sound of Mark's name. I'd seen it myself, had watched them meeting, laughing, and sharing moments they had no right to. But hearing it from someone else somehow made it feel more real, like a punch to the gut. And? I pressed, trying to keep the bitterness out of my voice. Mike shrugged, a casual smirk on his face. And nothing. Just saying, maybe she's not as loyal as you think. I'm not trying to make trouble here, Tom. Just giving you a heads up. I couldn't take it anymore. I stood up, my hands shaking with a mixture of anger and frustration. Thanks, Mike. Appreciate the concern, I muttered, trying to keep my voice steady. Hey, don't take it personally, he said, holding up his hands in mock surrender. I'm just looking out for you, buddy. Better to know than to live in the dark, right? I didn't respond. I turned and walked out of the bar, leaving him sitting there with that smug grin still on his face. Outside, the cool night air hit me like a slap, and I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I knew what I had to do now. The time for waiting, for gathering clues and holding back, it was over. I was done playing the role of the clueless husband. When I got home, Sarah was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She looked up as I walked in, giving me a tired smile. Hey, you're home early. I didn't respond. I just stood there, staring at her, taking in the face that had once been the center of my world, the person I had trusted more than anyone. And now, all I could see was the lies, the betrayal, the countless nights she'd spent with him, while I sat here, clueless and alone. Tom? Is everything okay? She asked, her smile fading as she picked up on the tension in the room. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. Sarah, I think we need to talk. She froze, her eyes widening as the color drained from her face. I could see the flicker of panic in her expression, the quick dart of her eyes to her phone. She knew. She knew what I was about to say, and for the first time, she was the one caught off guard. Talk about what? She asked, trying to sound casual, but her voice wavered, giving her away. I walked over to the couch, sitting down beside her, the silence stretching between us. I could feel my anger boiling just beneath the surface, but I forced myself to stay calm. I know, Sarah. I know about Mark. About everything. Her face went pale, her mouth opening and closing as she struggled to find the right words. Tom. I cut her off, unable to bear another second of her excuses. Don't. Just don't. I've seen the messages, the photos. I know about your little meetings with him. So don't try to lie to me. She stared at me, her eyes wide with a mix of shock and guilt. I never wanted to hurt you, Tom. It just happened. I laughed bitterly, the sound harsh and unfamiliar to my own ears. It just happened? Really? That's the best you can come up with? She looked away, tears welling up in her eyes, but I felt nothing. The woman sitting beside me was a stranger, someone I didn't recognize anymore. Whatever love I'd felt, whatever hope I'd clung to, it was gone, shattered by the weight of her betrayal. Was it worth it? I asked, my voice low and steady. All the lies, the sneaking around, was it worth throwing everything we had away? She didn't answer. She just sat there, her shoulders shaking as silent tears fell down her cheeks. And for the first time, I felt a strange, cold satisfaction. She was finally feeling the weight of what she'd done, finally facing the consequences of her actions. I'm done, Sarah, I said, standing up, my voice devoid of emotion. I'm done playing the fool. You can go be with him, with Mark. But don't expect me to wait around while you destroy everything we built. She looked up, her face stricken, her eyes pleading. Tom, please. I still love you. I made a mistake, but I love you. I want to make this right. I shook my head, a bitter smile on my face. You should have thought about that before you threw everything away. Without another word, I turned and walked to the bedroom, leaving her sitting alone on the couch, the silence of her guilt hanging heavy in the air. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I felt a strange sense of clarity. The truth was out. The lies had been exposed, and there was no going back. For the first time in weeks, I felt a twisted sense of relief. She was finally seeing the damage she'd caused, the life she'd torn apart for the sake of a thrill. But as I lay there, a new thought crept into my mind, dark and unrelenting. Maybe this wasn't enough. Maybe the pain, the guilt, the realization of her betrayal wasn't enough to make her understand. I wanted her to feel the loss, the emptiness I felt. I wanted her to truly understand what she'd done. And that's when the idea took root, a plan, something that would make her feel the weight of her choices in a way that words never could. If Sarah thought she could rebuild her life without consequences, she was about to find out just how wrong she was. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of silence. Sarah had left early, probably avoiding another confrontation. Fine by me. It gave me time to think, to plan. I'd spent the night replaying our conversation, her tears, the way she'd pleaded with me as if she actually cared. But all her words felt hollow, scripted, like she was only sorry because she'd been caught. I got ready for work, but the day was a blur. Emails, meetings, phone calls, they all blurred together, meaningless. My mind was fixed on one thing, making her feel exactly what I'd been feeling. By the time I got home, I'd made a decision. She thought I'd given up, thought I was done, but this was just beginning. She was waiting for me when I walked in, sitting at the kitchen table with 2 mugs of coffee, her expression cautious. Tom, she started, her voice softer than usual. I know I hurt you. I know that I betrayed your trust, but please, can we talk? I didn't sit down. I just stood there, watching her, my face blank. Go ahead, talk, I said, my voice colder than I intended. She looked down, fiddling with her mug. It wasn't what you think. It was a mistake, Tom. I got lost, Stop, I interrupted, my voice steady. You got lost? What does that even mean, Sarah? Were you lost every time you went to see him? Were you lost when you stayed out late and lied to my face? She flinched, looking away. I was unhappy. I didn't know how to talk to you. Things changed between us, and I made a mistake. But I want to fix it, Tom. I want to make things right. I laughed, a bitter, empty sound. Right. And you think you can just say a few nice words, shed a few tears, and I'll forget everything? That we'll just go back to the way things were? Her eyes filled with tears, and she shook her head, desperate. No. I know it won't be easy. I know it'll take time, but I love you, Tom. I love you, and I want to try. I sat down, leaning forward, my eyes never leaving hers. Do you even know what love is, Sarah? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you threw away everything we built for what? For a thrill? A distraction? She opened her mouth, but no words came. She just sat there, looking at me with a mixture of guilt and regret. And as I watched her, I realized something: this wasn't enough. Her tears, her words, they didn't satisfy me. I wanted more than her empty apologies. I wanted her to feel the same depth of betrayal, the same helplessness I'd felt since the night I'd discovered her lies. I leaned back, crossing my arms. You know what? Maybe we can fix this. Maybe there's a way to make things right. Her eyes lit up, a flicker of hope breaking through the guilt. Really? You'd be willing to try? I nodded, a plan forming in my mind. Sure. But if we're going to make this work, it has to be on my terms. Of course, she said quickly, wiping away a tear. I'll do whatever it takes. All right, I said, my voice calm, controlled. First, no more secrets. I want access to everything: your phone, your emails, every message you've sent. No more lying, no more sneaking around. I want complete transparency. She hesitated for a second, but then nodded. Okay. That's fair. I'll do it. And, I continued, if you want to fix this, you're going to end things with him. Right now. In front of me. She swallowed, looking down at her hands. Tom, it's complicated. No, it's not. I cut her off, my tone sharp. You end it with him now, or we're done. It's that simple. Her shoulders slumped, and after a long moment, she nodded. All right. I'll call him. She took out her phone, her hands trembling as she dialed his number. I watched as she put it on speaker, my heart pounding as I waited to hear his voice. After a few rings, he picked up. Hey, Sarah, he said, his tone warm, almost intimate. The sound of it made my skin crawl. Mark, we need to talk, she said, her voice shaky. There was a pause on the other end, and I could almost feel his confusion. Sure. What's up? I can't see you anymore. It was a mistake. I'm sorry, she whispered, her voice barely audible. He was silent for a moment, and then he laughed, a bitter, mocking sound. Really? You're doing this over the phone? Yes, she replied, her voice steadier now. It's over, Mark. I'm trying to work things out with Tom. I felt a surge of twisted satisfaction as she said the words, hearing her admit, out loud, that she was choosing me. But I didn't trust it. I didn't trust her. This call was just the beginning, just the first step in the plan that was unfolding in my mind. When she hung up, she looked up at me, her eyes pleading. I did it, Tom. It's over. Good, I said, standing up. But that's just the beginning. If you're really serious about fixing this, there's more we need to do. She nodded, relief flooding her face. Anything, Tom. I'll do anything. I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. We're going to go to therapy. Every week. And we're going to talk about everything. The lies, the betrayal, everything you did. You're going to own up to it, and you're going to face the consequences. She nodded, swallowing hard. Okay. Whatever it takes. For the next few weeks, we went through the motions. Therapy, transparency, small acts of trust she tried to rebuild with me. But no matter what she did, I couldn't forget. Every time I looked at her, I saw the betrayal, the lies. I could still hear the echo of her conversations with Mark, the laughter, the little secrets they'd shared. It was like a stain that wouldn't wash away, no matter how hard she tried to scrub it clean. One night, after a particularly tense therapy session, I sat alone in our living room, staring at my phone. My hands were trembling, my mind a mess of anger and frustration. I realized then that this wasn't going to work. Therapy wasn't going to magically erase the betrayal, wasn't going to make me forget the nights I'd spent lying awake, wondering where she was and who she was with. The pain was too deep, the trust too shattered. And then, an idea took root, a plan that would make her feel the loss, the devastation, just as I had. She thought she could rebuild her life after destroying mine? She was about to learn that some things don't just go back to normal. I reached out to a lawyer that night, one of the best in town. I wanted to know my options, to know exactly how much I could take from her if I decided to file for divorce. I wasn't interested in forgiveness anymore. I wanted justice. Real, concrete justice that would leave her with nothing but the consequences of her actions. The next morning, I was calm, almost serene. Sarah was in the kitchen, making coffee, unaware of the decision I'd made. She looked up when I walked in, giving me a small smile, like she thought we were on the mend. But I knew better. "Tom," she said, her voice soft, hopeful. "I know it's been hard, but I really feel like we're making progress. Don't you?" I looked at her, a sense of finality settling over me. "Yeah, Sarah. We're making progress." She didn't see it coming. She didn't know that the next steps I was taking weren't to fix us. They were to end us. Over the next few weeks, things fell into an eerie calm. Sarah kept up with all her promises, transparency, deleting Mark's contact, and sending me her location without hesitation. On the surface, we were mending things. She tried hard, but the trust was already shattered, leaving me with nothing but bitterness. I was playing along, letting her believe that things were improving, while a darker plan settled in my mind. Then, one evening, I got an email from Mark. It read simply, "I thought you should know that Sarah's been reaching out to me again. She told me it wasn't over." The words landed like a punch, but also with an odd sense of validation. She hadn't changed, she was still lying to my face. The next morning, I confronted her. She was at the kitchen table, and as soon as I asked if she'd been talking to Mark, she froze. She denied it, insisted that he was lying, that she was done with him. I slid my phone over, showing her Mark's message. She tried to defend herself, her face going pale as the weight of her lies settled over us. I couldn't listen to her anymore. I told her I was done, that I was filing for divorce. Her face fell, and she started pleading, saying she'd do anything, that she wanted to make things right. But it was over for me. I'd given her every chance, and she'd thrown it away. The days after that were a blur of paperwork, meetings with lawyers, and dividing up our assets. I kept everything quiet, playing the calm, detached husband, but inside, I was filled with a cold satisfaction. She had built a life on lies, and now she'd lose it all. My lawyer was sharp, meticulous, laying out a plan that would leave her with little to take away. The house, our savings, and our shared possessions were all carefully accounted for. I wanted her to see, to feel, what her betrayal had cost. Sarah fought back, tried to salvage her position, but her guilt was undeniable. She sent me messages, left pleading voicemails, and tried to talk me out of the divorce. But it was all hollow. She was only sorry now that she faced real consequences. I ignored her, focusing on my own future. The night before our divorce hearing, I got one last text from her. "Please, Tom. Let's talk. I know I made mistakes, but I love you. Don't do this." I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. The hearing was brief. Our lawyers went over the settlement, confirming the division of assets and the end of our marriage. Sarah tried to argue, tried to keep the house, but in the end, the judge ruled in my favor. It was all cold and final, the last step in dismantling the life we had built. As we left, she caught up to me, her eyes red-rimmed. "Tom, please. I know I messed up, but can't we at least talk?" I looked at her, feeling nothing but the finality of it all. "There's nothing left to say. You made your choice." Her hand trembled as she reached out. "I never meant to hurt you. I still love you. Goodbye, Sarah," I said, turning and leaving her there, alone. Walking out of the courthouse, a weight lifted from my shoulders. I had done what I needed to do, and finally, I was free. After the divorce, life should have felt calm, even liberating. But all I felt was emptiness, a hollow ache that lingered, as if the betrayal had hollowed out everything good. I'd ended the marriage, stripped away her comforts, but it didn't feel like enough. She'd picked up and moved on, finding her new life, while I was left with the ruins of our old one. One night, sitting alone in our nearly empty house, an idea took shape. Sarah had always cared about appearances, her social image, the friends who admired her. She'd valued that reputation over our marriage. So I decided it was time for her to lose that too. I started small. A few anonymous social media messages, some subtle comments left under her fitness posts. The comments were just enough to spark curiosity, to make people wonder if she was hiding something. She prided herself on her authentic lifestyle, her so-called perfect image. I was about to expose her for the fraud she was. It didn't take long for whispers to start circulating. Some friends noticed the comments, others started questioning her, asking if everything was as perfect as she claimed. The pressure began to mount, and her confident posts turned guarded, her cheerful photos less frequent. She responded to her followers, claiming it was baseless gossip. But I could see the panic in her eyes, feel her desperation with every new post. It was satisfying in a way that surprised me. Then, I took things a step further. I created an anonymous email account and sent a message to a couple of her big sponsors, attaching screenshots of her messages with Mark. I kept it vague, just a concerned friend, sharing some uncomfortable truths. Within days, her fitness sponsorships began to back away. The brands that once showered her with praise were now leaving polite but curt responses, making it clear they didn't want to associate with someone involved in scandal. I watched as her carefully crafted career crumbled bit by bit. Eventually, Sarah confronted me. She showed up at the house, looking exhausted, her eyes red and desperate. "Tom, I know you're behind this," she accused, her voice trembling. "Why are you doing this?" I looked at her calmly. "Because you destroyed everything I cared about, Sarah. You took my trust and broke it, threw away the life we built. Did you really think there wouldn't be consequences?" Her face twisted in disbelief. "Tom, please. I know I made mistakes, but ruining my career? Taking everything from me?" I shrugged. "I just made sure people knew who you really are. They deserve to know the truth. You were happy to destroy my life. Now it's your turn." She tried to argue, to defend herself, but her words meant nothing now. As she walked away, I felt a sense of finality, of closure that was both satisfying and strangely hollow. She was finally facing the consequences of her choices. And I was finally letting go. Word spread quickly, and her once adored reputation was left in tatters. Her social media comments became brutal, with former fans accusing her of lying, of putting on a facade. She lost sponsorship after sponsorship, and the cheerful posts she'd once made about her perfect life stopped altogether. I watched as her life fell apart, knowing that this time she'd have to live with her choices. There were no more quick fixes, no easy escape. A mutual friend reached out to me, saying, "You know, I never imagined Sarah would be the type. She seemed so put together, so loyal." I gave a bitter smile, keeping quiet, satisfied that others were finally seeing the truth too. The friends who had once adored her were distancing themselves, unwilling to be associated with her now that the truth was out. Then I got a call I didn't expect, Mark. He was furious, accusing me of ruining his life, of making everything personal. I couldn't help but laugh at the irony. "Funny how you think this is personal now," I said. "Didn't seem so personal when you were sneaking around with my wife." He tried to argue, to throw accusations my way, but I wasn't interested. I hung up, feeling a strange satisfaction, like I'd closed the door on that chapter of my life. For once, I felt like I'd taken back control. The next day, I found out Sarah had moved out of the city. Her career, her reputation, the life she'd spent years building was gone. The finality of it all sank in as I realized that she'd lost everything she'd once held dear. And in a strange way, that was the closure I hadn't expected but knew I needed. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I could finally move on. Life slowly settled into a new rhythm, quieter and simpler. I'd gotten rid of the memories, sold off old possessions, and moved into a smaller place. I was beginning to rebuild, to find a new version of myself free from Sarah's betrayal. Then, one afternoon, I received an email. It was from a name I didn't recognize. I opened it and found a message from Sarah, brief and to the point. she claimed she was pregnant. At first I thought it was some desperate tactic, a ploy to regain sympathy or try to pull me back in. But the words struck me with a strange kind of shock. If she was telling the truth, then the child could very well be mine. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to leave it in the past. But I had to know. I reached out to her, insisting on a paternity test if this claim was real. She agreed, saying nothing more, and we set up the test. The days leading up to the results felt surreal, a mix of anger, sadness, and a tiny sliver of hope that maybe, just maybe, this was a way to turn the page for good. When the results came back, it confirmed the child was mine. I felt a mixture of anger and responsibility. Sarah, who had once betrayed me, now held a link to my future in the form of a child I hadn't expected. As I came to terms with fatherhood, I started focusing on my future. I decided I would raise the child on my own, without Sarah's involvement, determined to be a better father than our fractured relationship might suggest. Then, as if to tie the last, twisted thread in the story, I received a video link from an unknown number. I opened it, and there it was, recent footage of Sarah and Mark together, laughing, clearly comfortable in each other's presence. It was undeniable, she was still seeing him, even after everything. Without a second thought, I sent her a message. "Stay out of my life, and don't ever contact me about the child again. You made your choices, and now I'm making mine." As I shut my phone, I felt a strange sense of freedom, as if a door had finally closed. The final act of her betrayal had solidified my decision. I was moving forward, ready to create a future free from the shadows she had cast. With that, I walked away, leaving her and the past behind. The life I would build next would be my own, untainted and free at last. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed it, hit like and leave a comment with your favorite part. We'd love to hear your perspective.